It's been more than 8 months since Lagos-based pastry chef Peju Ugboma died following an elective hysterectomy. The coroner's inquest into her death has been taking place at the Magistrate Court in Ogba, where another doctor from Premier Specialist Medical Center, the hospital where the surgery was performed, has been testifying. Arise correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya has been following the court process and sends this update.
The Samuel Ilori Courthouse in Ogba makes for a fitting venue for those looking for justice. Inside, a courtroom is hearing the latest part of the coroner's inquest into the death of pastry chef, wife and mother of two, Peju Ugboma, who died in April 2021 following an elective hysterectomy performed at the Premier Specialist Medical Center in Victoria Island. Dr. Nosokare Asemota is testifying. The anaesthetist was one of the doctors who was responsible for the medical care and treatment for Mrs. Ugboma. For hours, Dr. Asemota answered questions about what he knew, what he saw, and what he did before, during, and after Mrs. Ugboma's surgery and subsequent death. Some parts of his testimony did not mirror his written statement, discrepancies that were queried during his cross-examination, but ultimately dismissed by both he and legal counsel defending him as human error.
If any mistake was made, it was made by us when we typed out the thing for him. And it's of no moment.
So in general, are you satisfied with the testimony given by Dr. Asemota?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He spoke the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
The errors made by Dr. Asemota during his testimony were a cause for concern by the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission.
For the FCCPC, there are a few things that are important from a patient and consumer protection standpoint, and that is, at a minimum, an entitlement to consistent, clear, dependable, and accurate records. And we're able to cross-examine him to try and determine the accuracy of the records and actually how dependable what his source is. The reason why that's very important in patient care is just imagine, this is even just a mess with the dates alone. Just imagine if somebody else is reviewing this down the line. And once the records are inaccurate, then you have a flawed premise. And even the best professional opinion based on a flawed premise, it's not going to be that useful. It becomes even more serious when you're talking about healthcare. And so that for us, from our standpoint, I think we've been able to establish that. And this is not a sport. This isn't about whether a coroner's inquest, there's no winner, there's no loser.
Dr. Asemota was asked during cross-examination if he agreed that something had gone wrong at some point between Mrs. Ugboma's surgery and death. He said nothing went wrong. Soon after, the magistrate reminded Dr. Asemota he was still under oath. The doctor later accepted that something had in fact gone wrong.
If you were listening accurately, he did not say nothing went wrong. He said everybody is still curious as to what went wrong.
That was after the magistrate.
Well, I didn't hear him.
I won't preempt the coroner, but based on his responses to my questions and this point you made, I think that makes his entire testimony questionable. And if your testimony is questionable, if your testimony by itself is not internally consistent, that's your credibility. And if you lack credibility, your testimony isn't worth anything. I think we're all here to discover and address what went wrong. I mean, so for someone to come here and say nothing went wrong, now it is possible for absolutely nothing to go wrong and fatalities still end, even with the best of efforts. But the track record here, the entire trajectory and the record of all the testimony and all the information that is available suggests the contrary. I think we should move from there to saying what went wrong and how can we ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Peju Ugboma's widower, Ijoma, shared his thoughts about the hearing so far.
I'm actually quite satisfied because we're finally we're getting some answers. The primary doctors are being cross-examined, which means we're getting towards the latter stages of the case. Now, listening to Dr. Asemota's testimony, I mean, it was clear for you to see. I mean, this is based on your own judgment. And, you know, it's actually laughable, in my opinion, that you'd say nothing went wrong. A patient came in, no pre-existing condition, you assessed her, everything was fine, no chronic illness, and suddenly she gets in on Thursday, She does surgery on Friday, ICU on Saturday, I mean, dead on Sunday. I mean, it raises a lot of questions, and I'm happy that we're getting some of the answers to the questions now.
Well, with the close of today's hearing, all roads lead to Monday, the 31st of January. It will be on that day that the lawyers representing Premier will present yet another witness. It's expected to be another doctor or healthcare professional, and during that day, it is expected that that person, that witness, will be questioned and cross-examined. That is, of course, as the coroner's inquest into the death of Mrs. Peju Ugboma continues. Adefemi Akinsanya, Arise News, Lagos.
For more on this story, Arise correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya joins us now. Morning, Adefemi.
Good morning to you all. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, we've just watched that update, and you know, we try to remove emotions from what seems to be a very emotional story. And from what we saw there, we did have Dr. Nosakari Asimota testify for hours. Very, very hot courtroom, and he stood there and took every single one of those questions. Now, in the line of questioning, a few things that I wasn't able to fit into the report, which are pertinent to discuss, came up. So one of them is the fact that in the early parts of this case, it was known publicly that there was a third-party doctor in another country who had called doctors at Premier to say, I suspect this patient is bleeding internally. I suggest you go back into surgery. And for a while, there had been some questions about why that wasn't the case. Well, Dr. Asimota did answer questions during his testimony, and he said that the reason why they did not go back into theatre and put the patient back under anaesthetic is because they felt as though that would have led to her immediate passing, and they were more comfortable as a team to continue administering care without putting her under the pressure of surgery because of these medical issues that the patient had been going through post the first surgery. So that clears the air on that. However, as I said in the report, there were discrepancies in his testimony. A lot of them were dismissed by his legal counsel as human error, not knowing a date was the 22nd instead of the 23rd of April 2021 and vice versa. But when you speak to the FCCP, he says that even human error mistakes are pertinent and are important to discuss and clarify because first and foremost, if we're talking about records, you need to be dealing with accurate information. And if as a team we're talking about the death of a patient, we have to make sure that all I's are dotted and all T's are crossed. So, you know, from both sides, you can understand why it's important to make sure that what a doctor or what anybody is testifying to matches what they've written in their statements or matches what has been written to them. Again, with Premier, it is such a sticky situation. This is a hospital that has been in operation for decades, that has built a reputation of good and stellar medical care for years, and this is what has happened, and it's had a negative impact, you'd imagine, on not only the hospital's bottom line, but how they're seen publicly. But there is still a public and legitimate interest in this story, and as long as we are able to continue following it, we will do so. Monday, the 31st of January, which is this coming Monday, will be another opportunity for yet another doctor, we believe, from Premier to testify, give testimony, and be cross-examined. So it will be interesting to see what that doctor says and how that changes the course of the proceedings so far. But it has been a touchy subject for many people so far.
Yes, certainly it is. And perhaps, you know, also a good development to see at least one family standing up and raising questions about medical ethics. The main issue here is medical negligence. Oftentimes in Nigeria, when doctors make mistakes, we're told that doctors can bury their mistakes. But no, under medical ethics, they cannot bury their mistakes. We have Mr. Ugboma here standing up and saying there's a case of medical negligence here. And we hope that after this particular matter, that other families will follow this example. Because doctors, their job is to save lives, is not to be negligent. The second source of concern for me is that this has been on, this coroner's inquest has been on since June 2021. And now you say it's been postponed till January 31st. Do you see any evidence that, you know, there's some kind of delay? Because last year, it was the pathologist's account, you know, that took a very long time. There's also the Medical and Dental Council part of it. The Medical and Dental Council established a prima facie case against 3 doctors at the Premier Specialist Hospital. Where are we with that? And is there any reference to Evercare Hospital where, you know, in the earlier representations, we were told she died, having been taken there from the Premier Specialist Hospital? These are some of the questions.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rubin. Very quickly, and I'm sure Tunun would be very well aware of this, sometimes when it comes to testimony, it takes a very, very long time just to go through one witness. And in the interest of time and for people getting home, other things that need to be done, you have cases adjourned to other days. So that's usually what has caused the delay in this case. And there are many people who need to give testimony, many people to speak to, lots of documents to go over. So that is time. Though the witness was present in court yesterday, they weren't able to start her cross-examination because of time. So that's why the case has been adjourned to this coming Monday. When we look at, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second and third part of your question.
No, the doctors against whom prima facie case was established by the Medical and Dental Council was the latest in that regard. And then, you know, there's also another hospital,
yes.
Evercare
Hospital. Thank you. Let me start with Evercare. They were mentioned in testimony yesterday. The hospital is where Mrs. Ugboma eventually died. And there were questions from the family side of the aisle as to the time it took to bring the patient into Evercare. There was a discussion during court where they said it took some 14 to 19 hours for the patient to be moved from when there was a doctor within Premier had made made advice to say that perhaps this should happen. A CT scan, dialysis. These are equipments that weren't able to be administered at Premier. But there was a delay in getting the patient from Premier, which was in Victoria Island, to Evercare, which is in Lekki, a distance of maybe 10 minutes. It's not a very far distance, but it took a lot of time from that advice that was given to her actually being moved. And the doctor was questioned as to why it took that long. And he said that they were still administering care. They were still making decisions about the best thing to do for this patient. Unfortunately, when the patient was moved, there was very little that could have been done once she arrived at Evercare, and that is where, unfortunately, she passed on. But that did come up in testimony. As it pertains to other matters facing the other bodies interested in this case, that has been somewhat separate from what we've been dealing with at the coroner's hearing. Though the FCCP was there, and the immediate legal counsel for the family, the Ogba lawyers, they have been predominantly what we've been facing so far in court. But on the sidelines, yes, there have been other issues that have been pertained to this case, and we haven't been able to find too many updates on that just yet.
The coroner's inquest will only deal with the cause of death to establish exactly what happened. Thank you, Adefemi.
Thank you very much, Adefemi.